Welcome to 5 Minute Fridays. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're going to talk about cutting back evergreen perennials. So when we talk about perennials, this shrub is a perennial, right? It lives here year over year over year, but typically we reserve that word perennial for meaning herbaceous things that don't become woody, just to kind of define them, the difference between this shrub perennial and this herbaceous perennial or a non-woody perennial. But some of our non-woody perennials actually stay evergreen in the garden. And so this cast iron plant would be a great example of that. It doesn't become woody down at the bottom, but it doesn't die back to the ground, okay? It can. You could get a winter cold enough here to knock this thing completely back to the ground, but most winters it stays evergreen. And so we're gonna treat different evergreen perennials in different ways coming out of the winter. And we'll show you some of those here in the garden. For this cast iron plant, what tends to happen on this one's called stripes. You can see there's stripes in the leaves here. What tends to happen is the older leaves get a little bit ratty on them over time. I could choose to cut this thing completely back to the ground, and there are cases for that. We see frequently cast iron plants that have been used in landscapes and then kind of not done anything with them for 3, 4, 5 years, and it's just so much browned out material in it that they probably just need to be cut back to the ground completely and reset. But if you're staying on top of this on a yearly basis, you can just come down and basically it's a matter of finding the, kind of the leaves that, just didn't look as good coming out of winter, and then tracing them back down to the ground and just cutting them off. So I can do that with pruners or this pruning knife or whatever. But I'll just go through and selectively, again, I can do the whole plant if I wanted to, but if I don't have to, I don't want to, because I like the evergreen component of this. But this is something I do in the late winter. At the same time, I can get in here and pull these leaves out, and these actually bloom down at ground level, typically this time of year, depending on the temperature. That may have already happened or hasn't happened yet. I don't know, but I don't see any flowers down there right now. But that's all I'm gonna do on my cast iron plants. Rhodia is another one that would fall into this category of just kind of selectively going through. Again, and I say this in any video where I get inside of a plant and start working, there's a ligustrum that's germinated, that's in the middle of that plant. If it ended up this tall this season, it'd be much more difficult to get that out. So my time spent with my hands down in this plant this morning is going to make it look better and get rid of a weed that was coming up in there. So again, if it's more than 80% of the plant you're cutting back, you might as well just go ahead and cut the whole thing back. But I think overall, I may have missed 1 or 2 here that don't look particularly good, but that's how I treat cast iron plants. Just get rid of the tired material. Keep the ones that were fresher from late season. Now it's got plenty of light getting down here to the base. New leaves will fill that in. It'll also get some light down here to the base and allow it to flower if it hasn't flowered yet. We have several different carex in the garden. Carex are not technically grasses, but they're grass-like plants. And so grasses are gonna be in this group of things that we're gonna cut back. Evergreen perennials, but although they're not evergreen, they've died at this point. The top of the foliage has died, but we need to at some point go and clean that off in order for that new foliage to come back up through. You don't have to do it, but it will look better during this next growing season to have those grasses cut back. Carex, again, grass-like plant. This is one that you do based on how they look coming out of winter. So this Everillo carex, this gold or chartreuse colored carex here is hardy in zone 5 to 9. In zone 5, it's going to get beat up quite a bit during the winter time, and it's almost always going to require some maintenance coming out of the winter. We're in zone 8A. We've basically had a zone 8A winter at this point. Temperatures in the middle teens to low teens a few nights during the winter time. For us, it's a matter of looking at them and deciding whether or not they've gotten kind of ragged enough that we want to cut them back. But you have to be careful with carex not to overdo it. I don't want to go way down. Like with Liriope and Mondo grass are also on this list, and you can run a lawnmower over your Liriope and cut it down pretty far and get down into it a little bit more and it'll be okay from that. The carexes are not particularly fond of being cut back. Most are not particularly fond of it. So we don't want to overdo it when we do it. They're a little slower to come back than other things, than your ornamental grasses and your liriope, mondo grass, other things in that, some of the things in that lily family, okay? So if I'm going to cut them back, I'm just going to cut them back about halfway, something like that, or a little more than half, and I'm just gonna mound them over. So where I would go, just take my lawnmower out for the liriope and cut it basically to the ground, you know, maybe on the third setting on the lawnmower. This, I'm just gonna create a small mounded shape. These are probably in good enough shape that I don't necessarily have to do this. This is the end of January as I'm filming this. You may wait into February to do the things I'm showing you right now. I tend to do them on the channel a little bit earlier just to show it off. But what we're trying to do is beat the new growth, okay? So sometime in early April, I'm gonna start getting new growth coming up, even late March, depending on how warm it is out here, up through here. So if I'm going to cut them back, I don't need to cut these back, but I'm gonna show you how I would cut them back. Again, I'm just kind of lightly pruning it. I'm not getting way down into the middle of this plant, okay? And that cleans them up enough that all that new foliage will come up through that. I find if I cut these down into the kind of the deadish looking part that's way down in the middle, they do not respond well to that. They could potentially rot between now and the time they're going to start growing. But you'll wait to do this until it's a little closer to the time they're going to start coming. New growth is going to come, but get it done before that new growth comes up through them. Okay, so again, just creating little mounds out of these. They'll come back up through that. If you don't have to do, if they look good and you don't have to do it, don't do it. I just did it just so I could show you how I would do it if it was 100% necessary. If they look bad, but there you go. This Feather Falls carex looks terrific. It's got a little brown on a few blades, but I'm just gonna leave it be. One thing that we might consider though on a plant like this is if it's gotten too big or it's overcrowded, I could pop it out of the ground and potentially divide it a little closer to spring. I can also get in here, since we leave our leaves on the ground, you know, I can get in here and clean it up a bit, you know, so I can get it looking better, pop it out of the ground and divide it. Or again, I can just go through here and cut it halfway back, just like I did those Everillo carex if it was in a little worse, a little more tattered. I've already shown this in a couple of garden task videos here in the garden to do the hellebores. As the new growth is coming on the center of the hellebores, this one's kind of in a funny position here. They were dug out and transplanted, but we missed one and it's still here. I'm just gonna go ahead and cut the foliage back and then we'll pop it out of the ground a little later in the winter, early spring. But I got flowers starting to come up down here at the bottom, so it's time to cut back this tattered foliage if you need to. Again, in colder areas, it may have died back so much that you're not even seeing all this material. If they're absolutely perfect, you don't have to cut it back, but I like to cut them back so the flowers can really present themselves here in the garden. Don't do this in the fall. We want these leaves to continue to photosynthesize through the winter. It's the point of being an evergreen perennial, right? That you get to photosynthesize, you know, even during mild days during the fall and winter in the winter months. So we wait on these evergreen perennials to cut this material back, and you can just, you know, take these stems. You know, if I use the pruning knife, I can really make quite a bit quicker work of this than using pruners and doing one leaf at a time. But there you go, just like that. Now all the new leaves, new foliage, new flowers, all of that will present itself. We're going to transplant this one later, but I think that was the last one I had to prune. Some of our ferns die back to the ground and some of them stay as evergreen perennials, and this same exact thing that we're doing on the cast iron plants and the others applies to ferns as well. You're going to get a little tattered looking in time if you're not coming in occasionally and taking out the kind of faded, you know, kind of more worn material that's in the plant and giving it light, giving it room, giving it space to really put on some new fresh looking fronds. This is a tassel fern here, and it's not been in the ground long enough to really have a lot of, you know, old bad material on it, but it does have a, you know, It's the same exact thing here. I'm just coming down here to the bottom, getting off anything that looks, you know, like it's, you know, kind of tired looking at this point, or has broken. Maybe it's been walked on, or, you know, whatever's happened to it. And now I'm gonna have plenty of, you know, light down here into the plant to get some additional growth on it. But you can just look around, find the stuff that looks a little bit, you know, ratty looking, for lack of a better word for that, and get it cleaned up. And that's all we really have to do. This thing's going to, it's been in the ground for 2 or 3 years now. I've given it enough space, she's looking right at the camera here, to fill back in. But so your evergreen ferns, clean them up before the new fronds start on them. So again, I'm probably a little earlier than I need to be on this. I'm into January. I could wait until the 1st of March to do this process, but I just wanted to show it off here in a video, just to let you go around your garden and see these non-woody plants that stayed evergreen in your garden. Do they need to be cleaned up or not? And if they do, sometime between now and the time they start putting on new growth is the time to do it. There are some things you're going to cut completely back, you know, grasses, typically, just to clean that stuff up. This epimedium I'm about to cut completely back. The new flowers, spikes that come up on these don't look particularly good in the dead old foliage, but if I get rid of this now before those flowers come, the flowers will really be quite showy, and then new foliage will take the place of this. There's a lot of other things that I don't have to show off in the garden here that would be included in this, and you can kind of just go through your own garden and see what are the non-woody things I have in the garden, and how do they look at this point if they're evergreen. And there are going to be various levels of evergreen depending on where you live in the country, like I've already said. But things like heucherellas, you know, if you have got dead material in those, lamb's ear would be on this list. If you've got material in them that looks kind of rough or has been damaged over time, you just want to get it. Keep the fresh looking material, eliminate the non-fresh looking material. Herbs would be on this list: thyme, oregano, sage, any of those things that stay evergreen. And again, depending on where you live, stay evergreen. Any of those things can be cleaned up this time of year. So that's kind of the scouting we do. And a lot of these things bloom super early in the season, so we're trying to get this foliage off before new growth comes up through it pretty quickly, and this becomes a much harder selective job rather than I can just, you know, off with its head job, which is what I'm able to do right now. But I'll just take this epimedium and very quickly, you know, with the knife, I can get this down to the ground. And already I can see some growth down at the base of it. And the timing of this, again, will be, you know, a little later in the northern areas for sure. And some of the stuff will just die back to the ground completely, and you won't have to deal with it, period. But you see how I can make quick work of this. This material can go on the compost pile and come right back out here in the garden and feed these plants later as compost, or feed the vegetable garden or whatever. And again, you're going to find weeds when you do this. And I didn't get all of that, but another vine. Here's you're going to find weeds as we go that we can get out. Some of these plants are going to be different year to year, depending on where you're at. So for us, like agapanthus, our agapanthus just gets pretty much crushed to the ground every year here, but agapanthus a little further south may stay more evergreen, and you may do selective pruning like I'm showing in this video, where you're just taking out some old foliage. This acanthus is a great example of that. This acanthus last year hardly was phased during the winter time. So it came back here and just took some selective foliage out of it, you know, toward the end of winter, and, you know, kept the leaves that were looking good. This year we've gotten enough cold weather that it's actually just been, you know, it's been taken back to the ground basically. I don't really have to clean this up unless I'm, you know, really particular in here, and you know, I want to clean it up. But it just got turned to mush after all the, you know, low nights in the teens and that kind of thing. Farfugium next to it. This is another example. Last year, this particular farfugium lasted through the whole winter, looked great. This year, it's a little rough. It's a little beat up looking. This one's a slightly marginal perennial in my area, so I'm going to actually give this another month or so before I cut it back. and just keep this protected lid on the top of it to prevent it from, because this one's gonna have to be completely cut back. I mean, every leaf on it has got some damage. So I'm gonna allow these leaves, the leaves from the Farfugium and the leaves that have fallen down in it, to kind of protect it for a few more weeks, and then I'll take this one down to the ground. If it's a total cutback like that, do give some consideration to whether or not it's marginal, and you're not going to do this in January like I'm doing right now. I'll just wait till the end of February. I want to get it before the new growth starts though. That's the important part here. Let it protect itself and then get it before it comes up. So there's just some of the things here in our garden that are herbaceous perennials. Dianthus is another one in the south where people can use some dianthus as perennials, and they stay evergreen and bloom in the fall, bloom in the spring. Those can be cleaned up as well this time of year, or slightly a little closer to spring, if you want to wait a little bit closer to spring. So there you go. There's a much longer than 5 Minute Friday demonstrating cutbacks on some evergreen perennials in the garden. Thanks for watching.